Oh, me, oh, my. Well, it's great to laugh, isn't it, by the way? Great to laugh. There was a farmer once who was living down in Kansas, and of course they had the storm cellar because of all of the tornadoes and things. And the siren went off, and people all ran into the closed the storm cellar doors, and there was a terrible noise and howling and wind like trains going by. And when all was quiet, they heard things banging against the house. And when all was quiet, and they came out, and he realized that the barn was gone. The only thing that was left was a silo, which was on fire. And then there was a tractor next to it that was completely untouched. Brand new tractor. And as he was giving thanks to God for the fact that it could have been worse, the silo collapsed and fell on the tractor. And the man just started laughing. And his wife thought he had lost his mind. She said, well, honey, are you right? What's wrong? He says, why are you laughing? He goes, it's just the completeness of it all, that's all. Just the completeness of it all. Do you ever seen the movie The Money Pit with Tom Hanks? Come on, anybody see it? Not enough. We're going to show it next week at church. But they have one where, my father was a plumber, and his father was a plumber before him, and on the summers between the seminary, I actually worked as a journeyman plumber for a while. It was very interesting. You had to do a little bit of everything. But I remember that there were tubs that were not the kind that are cast iron and then enameled with ceramic on it, but they were actually ceramic tubs. In fact, you might remember some of the big metal ones with the claw feet, and they were high in the back, and you could fill the water all the way up to here. Those were great. I could go swimming in those when I was little, as a matter of fact. But anyway, so in Tom Hanks in The Money Pit, the whole house has to be redone. And as they start to take things apart to fix it, it was just that final tug on the pipe or the wiring where everything starts disintegrating. He goes to plug in a toaster, and all the wiring is on the wall. And anyway, so they're getting ready to fix the plumbing, upstairs. And they have one of these great big ceramic tubs. And the floor gives way, and it falls through the ceiling, which is collapsed, and breaks in a million pieces on the dining room floor. And Tom Hanks just can't help laughing. He's got the silliest, goofiest laugh. He just keeps laughing and laughing and laughing. I realize that I'm regarding this in a very significant spiritual way, but I don't think everybody else is getting it. The point is, when everything falls apart, what's left? You might say a sense of humor. You might say each other. You might say with the farmer, the house, the family. But sometimes we just realize that things can be really chaotic, and there's no way for us to control that. And some people would say, that's life. Deacon Paul Gifford said one time, he says, it was written, if you want to make God laugh, make plans. If you want to make God laugh, make plans in your life. And so the beginning of Lent is an opportunity for us to realize how everything is not always under our control, not even us. We don't always do what we say we would. In fact, St. Paul said it very clearly. He says, the evil that I would not, it says, the good that I would, I do not. The evil that I would not do, I do anyway. The good that I would, I do not. The evil that I do not, I do anyway. Let's try that again. The good that I would, I do not. The evil that I would not, I do anyway. So, in this beginning of Lent, what does it say to us? It says that there's always the chance to start over. There's always a chance to begin again. The mercies of the Lord are not exhausted. Each day they are renewed in his faithfulness. Each day the mercies of the Lord are renewed. I was watching the Spielberg movie late last night. I turned it on and I couldn't turn it off. It was so wonderful. The movie called Lincoln. And I can't remember actually who played Lincoln, but it was a stellar performance. And unlike some of the other descriptors and actors playing Lincoln, This one was very authentic historically in that Lincoln had, we don't have any recordings of him, but he had kind of a high, thin, reedy voice. When you think of Lincoln, you think of the voice of God. You know, you think of somebody saying, 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon, I mean, you think of somebody like Raymond Massey. You know, you don't think of somebody, you know, who has a high, reedy voice. You know, but what happened is you're drawn more to not the voice, but the words. Not so much the voice, but the words. I remember Father Bill Burke used to tell me that when he was associate pastor in one of the parishes he was in, he passed away 2 years ago after 62 years of being a priest. The last parish he was there for 40 years. The last parish, 62 years. And he's buried out at New Cathedral Cemetery. And on his tombstone it says, William F. Burke, Monsignor William F. Burke, faithful priest for 62 years. Now, during the years of being a priest, he wasn't perfect at it, but he was darn near perfect at it. But I remember there were times where his perfection failed. But what really taught me was what his response to that was. He was in church one day with a mass for the school children, and one of the good sisters, you know, at mass was over, was yelling at the children for laughing during mass and for talking to one another, for being disrespectful to the Blessed Sacrament that was in church. And when he finished mass, he came out of the sacristy and he saw this nun really giving it to the kids, you know, and he stepped up and he said, just stop, right there, just stop, you know. And then he said something like, kids, you're dismissed to go to school. Sister, let's talk. And what happened is, after all the kids were gone, he said to the sister, don't ever do that again. He says, you have no idea how tough life is on these kids, because the school was in the city. He says, or sometimes what a difficult home life they had. They don't come to church and have us jump on them. Got it? I never want to see you do this again. Then she started crying. He left. He got in his car, he drove around the block, and he came back, and he went up to her and he apologized to her. He said, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. He was right in what he did, but he had hurt somebody in doing it. And the very fact that he was being consistent, because he said, we don't hurt people in church, and he found himself doing the same thing. Of course, it was to an adult who should know better, you know, but all of us should know better. In the movie Lincoln, it's near the end, it's the last 4 months of his life. In fact, he was shot on Good Friday. You know that. April 14th or April 15th. I think he died April 15th, 7:22 in the morning in the house across from Ford's Theater. And so what happened is, the day before, he's going through all these petitions, and there's one that's for clemency for a 15-year-old who was so afraid of going into battle that he hobbled his horse. And his commander, the captain, the colonel, you know, sent a letter saying, you know, he should be hanged. And so many, hundreds of thousands of people had died in the war by that time. By the way, you probably don't know, that's how we started to get Easter. I don't mean the religious feast of Easter, I mean the idea of the Easter bunny. Because what happened is, prior to the war, the preachers would preach about hellfire and brimstone. You know, how much people needed, you know, to get their act together. After the immense suffering of the war, because the population of the United States was nowhere near the 300 million we have now. And so there was barely a family that was not untouched by having lost people on both sides of the Union and the Confederacy in the war. And so what happened is then, when Easter came, the preachers began to preach a message of consolation, mercy, joy. And the rabbit, besides being a long time a pagan symbol attached to spring, was seen as being a sign of joy and rebirth. And that's partly where we got the Easter bunny from. Because prior to that, The preaching was all reminding everybody of their sins. Now the time came to remind everybody of God's mercy. So Lincoln, as he's looking at this letter, and he's reading from the captain, whoever it was, that said, "Such dereliction in the course of duty is treasonous and endangers men. It was cruelty to animals. This was a valuable horse, an instrument in the war, and the boy should be hanged." And Lincoln had to say yes or no. And I think it was Seward, who was the Secretary of State, who said, you've got to uphold the discipline in the Army. And he said, he says, cruelty to animals, 15 years old. If we hung every 15-year-old who was cruel to animals, there'd be no 15-year-olds left. And he pardoned him. So this is what the beginning of Lent is for us. Jesus is tempted in every way. Of course, because he's human, he's tempted like us, but because he's God, he doesn't give in. For us, we merely are human, but we are touched by God's grace, which means that when we fail, and when we fail again and again and again, we haven't used up, our get-out-of-hell cards, because that's the man who died to make up for all of our transgressions. So this season of the 40 days of Lent, when I was young, I always thought of it as a time of punishment, sacrifice, giving things up. No chocolate, no candy, no movies, which was probably a suffering for my mother, because it actually was really good when we had a quarter and could go up to the movies and stay there all day long. Can you imagine the peace that my mother finally got after a while? Because it wasn't just me going, it was all the kids in the neighborhood, Go up, there's a double feature. And at that time, you didn't have to wait. What time does it start? You just went in. And it just ran all day long. And there came a time where when it ended, you just wait, and then it started over again until you'd say, oh, here's the part where we came in. That's not the most important thing in my homily today, but I can't help but reminisce. But anyway, the most important part is these 40 days of Lent are a time for us to remember that we can always be forgiven. Always. Always. No matter how serious it is, we can always be forgiven. And that sometimes, even for repeat offenders, we reach a point where God's grace touches us enough that we then change. And we become, at least in this area, a little better. We're no longer perfect, never were. We don't have to worry about it. I learned more from listening to Monsignor Burke yell at the nun and then come back to apologize, because it meant that he was completely consistent in what he wanted to have happen when people came to church. That's a priestly thing to do. And you might be thinking about the times that you came to church or were in school or a Catholic school and people yelled at you. And when you were little, you can know how much that can hurt. But as adults, you can wind up still remembering it. Sometimes you never get out from under that. 40 days of Lent is a reminder that we can get out from under it. Amen? Amen. Amen.